Hi everybody, I'm Fran Carr. If you don't already know who I am in charge of local history and genealogy for the Pendleton County Public Library. And today I am out here on Gumlick Road at the Roanoke Cemetery. The Roanoke Cemetery is about 12 miles-ish from Falmouth, about 8 from Williamstown. It is the cemetery is across the road from the church, the Roanoke Christian Church. Let's see, I'm going to show you the church in case you decide you want to come out here and see where your loved ones are, in case I name somebody you know. So let me kind of turn the camera. Hope I don't jar you too badly, but there we go. That's the church. If you come from Falmouth out here, you would travel, the best way to get here is come out 330. So come off the bridge in Falmouth like you're heading toward the high school, make a left onto 330. So if you're coming north, you'll make a right onto 330. I mean, coming south, you will turn right on 330. And you follow it out, you'll see signs for 1054. You want to pass up 1054, cross the little bridge, not too far from 1054. And Gumlick Road is that little narrow road that goes straight in front of you. 330 makes the curve on around, so you don't want to do that. You want to come on up. And you really can't miss it. You'll probably see the church before you see the cemetery. Like I said, the cemetery is across from it. Today, well, before we get started, I want to just kind of throw out a few thank yous here, mostly to you all who've tuned in today. You've been very patient. Programming virtually is not as easy as doing it face-to-face. So you've been very patient and very encouraging to me, and I really appreciate that. You have no clue. I also want to give a shout out to some of my co-workers, Jacob Fields, who's doing the editing on this film, and Regina Scott, who did some of the filming yesterday for me. Due to some technology issues, we weren't able to use that footage. So, but she still did a great job, and I really do appreciate it. We're going to walk across the road here, and there is a little road that runs next to the cemetery. I have no clue what the name is, and I don't even see a street sign here or road mark. But I am parked here, so I will take you across, and the first thing I'm going to do, I've got the gate already open, is I'm going to kind of pan the cemetery so you can get an idea for where I'm going when I do this presentation. When we come in the gate, this is what you're going to see if you go to your immediate left. And I'm going to work down the tombstones all along this chain link fence. Okay, you see the chain link? I'm sure you do. And I'm going to kind of weave over to the right and pick up some stones over there. When I get to the very end, there's another fence across the tree line back there. I will work down it, and then I will make my way back across the center of this hill and catch those tombstones. That would be, let's see, who would be kind of in the center? Kells, Porters, a couple different places for Porters. And then when I get out here, I will when I get to the root, I don't know if you can see it or not, but it's a really big marker way back to the left there. I'll start, that's Kenner. So when I get to Kenner, I will come across the hill and go kind of down the hill, and then come back up to another group of Porters and Ravenscrafts. They'll be kind of on the end. The Ravenscrafts are the stones that have their backs to us, if you can see that. So that will be where I end up. Okay? And from this point on, it's going to be a PowerPoint. We're not really able to get very good filming here. A lot of wind, because we are on top of a hill. And so from this point on, it will be a PowerPoint. I thank you so much for coming today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the program. I've chosen to take you on a tour of the Roanoke Community Cemetery today, and I chose it for a few reasons. One, I love cemetery tours. I wouldn't bring you out. Two, I wouldn't bring you out here because it is just not really convenient. It's so far out of town. And three, I believe everybody has a story. You may not think you have a story, but I'm here to tell you that you do. You just have to look. And the people in this cemetery are no exception to that. They also have a story. The cemetery has a few quirks, and I'm going to kind of address those right off the bat. You're looking at one of them. If you notice how the tombstones here are at an angle compared to the rest of them, they are kind of buried in here a little bit on the crooked side, to say the very least. Some additional quirks are, if you go to most cemeteries, you will notice the man it's consistent with the man on the left and the wife on the right, or vice versa, but it's consistent. It is not consistent in this cemetery. Also, how the stones are placed in this cemetery are not consistent. If you are standing, for example, if you are standing in front of two stones, you may be looking at the words or the people's names and their date of death or whatever is on the stone, whatever words are engraved on it. You may be looking at it on one stone, and the other stone, you are actually looking at the back of it and there's nothing there. You have to walk around, but they are side by side. So that's kind of a quirk. This was, as part of the story, this was a started as a family cemetery, became a community cemetery. So the families who had loved ones buried there were responsible for the maintenance. The graves were hand dug, so that created a problem. You know, if we hit a rock or a tree was in the way, you just kind of moved them. That probably accounts for some of the rows not being really even. Over time, a lot of graves probably were not marked, and over time, several monuments may have succumbed to the elements. You know, weather is not always good to old stones. You know, lawnmowers hitting them are not good to old stones. The church also did, when they took over the cemetery eventually, just because basically it was in neglect. When they took over the cemetery, they did remove some of the stones to facilitate mowing. So that's something else too, that kind of helps with its quirkiness, I guess you could say. This land was owned by the Moore family, and they had, as I said, it was a family cemetery here. We will meet the first burial here, which was the Moore's daughter, Missouri. This was also, as I said, the site of their home, but it was also at one point the site of their first Roanoke school. I've long considered this to be one of the saddest cemetery in the county. I might be wrong. If you can top it, let me know. But I think I'm close in that assessment anyway. I call it such because nearly every grave inside this cemetery has a sad story that the occupant could have told you if they were still living. Either they had more tragedy than was really their fair share, or someone in their family did. And they lived through that tragedy with them. However, I hope that you take away from this that these people were resilient. They just kept going. Next of all, we have, this is right, William Justice and his wife, Sally. As you come right in the gate, you will, if you walk straight ahead, you're gonna just hit them. William Justice was born in 1831. He lived to be 76. I cannot find a Civil War record for him. I'm assuming, you know, he's of age to have fought in it. So because I can't find a record, I'm assuming he did not fight. I don't know. His wife, Sally, is buried next to him, and the information about her is on the back side of this tombstone. I call them the gatekeepers. I like to think that they know who comes and goes and that they're keeping track of everything. Sally lived to be 80 years old, and her family came here from Virginia as part of a wagon train. The next person I'm going to show you is Sylvia Shipp. If you come in the gate, she is right there on your left, immediately on your left. So if the justices could be called the gatekeepers, I think she could be called their assistant. Sylvia was, let's see, born in 1908 and died in 1910. You can't really see it on this marker, but at the bottom it says, "Our darling." In 1910, there were no death certificates or death records kept formally, so we have no idea what Sylvia died from. Next to her is Alpha Shipp. As you can see, she was 19 years old, I believe. Exactly, right? Yes. She was the daughter of Bert and Ruth Porter Shipp, and there are quite a few Porters buried here. Her parents are buried next to her. They came from this community. However, Alpha was born in Cincinnati, and she died in Lawrence County, Indiana. She was an employee of Western Union. She worked as a telegraph operator. Notice that she died on the day after Valentine's. Alpha had been expecting a marriage proposal, but her boyfriend broke up with her instead. So she killed herself by drinking rat poisoning. Since her family was from this area, they brought her back here and buried her. And as I said, they are buried next to her. I call the next one the saddest of all stories. This is Ida Bailey Lanter and her children. There are no markers. We know from death certificates that they are buried here, but we have no idea where. Ida Bell was the first wife of Bert Lanter. And some of you may remember Bert. He lived in Falmouth for a while. He died in 1974. She was born in 1902 and died in 1927. She was about 10 years younger than Bert. She died from what was called galloping consumption, tuberculosis. Before she died, the Lanters lost 3 children. A son, Charles Thomas, died in the Spanish influenza epidemic of 1918. He was 8 months and 11 days old. The actual date of birth, cause of death was pneumonia, and the secondary cause was the flu. Daughters Hallie Mae and Naomi Francis died of measles within 2 days of each other. Pneumonia was the secondary cause of their death. Hallie was just almost 2.5 years old, and Naomi was 2 months old and 11 days. So between November of 1918 and February of 1927, Bert had buried 3 of his 5 children and his wife. So in a 9-year span, he lost 4 members of his family, and they are all buried here at Roanoke. His son, Elbert Jr., was born in 1925, so he was 2 when his mother died. He died in 1943, roughly 18 years old. He was in Shoemakertown, working in a tobacco barn, and fell out of the barn and died as a result of the fall. So only one of the 5 children actually lived to be a full adult. That was Margaret Francis, and she lived to be 87 years old. A lot of you, if you live in Falmouth or ever lived in Falmouth, you might know her. She was as Margaret Francis Shields. So Bert's parents are also buried here. They are Larkin and Margaret Carr. The death of their 4 grandchildren, and their first daughter, and this daughter-in-law, is just the tip of the tragedy that they suffered. Next of all, right next to them, still going along the chain link fence, we have Joseph Lanter. He was 25 years old when he died. I consider that to be in your prime, even at the time that he was born. No cause of death is known. He is buried next to his parents, Mary Alice Lowe Lanter, and BF, or Benjamin Franklin, or Ben Lanter. He was known by all of those monikers, was his father. This is the stone on the plot, and each of the family members have a footstone. So And I'm going to show you Mary Alice really, I think, had lived through a lot of tragedy. She had two sisters to die young. One was 20 and one was 38. And we will meet them. They are buried here. Here you see her pictured with her three brothers. They were the four last ones to survive out of her siblings. She was the daughter of William Thomas Lowe and Lucy Jane Asbury Lowe. Her brother Jake on the far right was the only one that lived in Cowansville. Alvin lived at Williamstown and Dick Frank moved to Ohio. But you see her marker here. So in addition to losing Joseph early, her husband, Ben, was tried for murder in 1903. This murder occurred in Williamstown. There are different accounts if you look it up in newspapers. One account says, well, they all seem to agree that he went into this bar located on what they used to call Dead Man's Corner in Williamstown. We know it as Paris Street today. Apparently there were quite a few bars there, and it was a pretty rough little place to be. So he went into Bart Simmons' saloon, and one account says that he plunged a knife into the side of Frank Musselman's neck. Another account says that he cut Frank Musselman from ear to ear and severed the windpipe. Ben then went and turned himself in. Immediately after he killed the man, he offered no reason at the bar. When asked why he did it, he just offered no reason for doing it, just turned around and left. He was, according to one newspaper article, he was put under a $5,000 bond. He did stand trial and was found not guilty. Then 6 years later, in 1909, two of Mary Alice's sons, George and Grover, were involved in the Ransom murders. The Ransom murders started out at a dance. The whole fight that led to that started at a dance at the home of Worth Barnes, right outside of Williamstown. The dance pretty much turned into a free-for-all, and a lot of people were hurt. One of the Lanter boys had received a scalp wound from a bullet in his head. So they kind of rounded up everybody, took them into Williamstown to get taken care of by the doctor. If you were hurt, you went into town. So while everybody was in town getting patched up, the Lanter boys got into a quarrel with Sidney Ransom, also known as Sid. Ethelbert Ransom then tried to step in between and break up the fight. When he did that, he was hit in the head with believed to be a rock and was shot. He made his way over to the courthouse lawn and leaned up against a tree and died. Meanwhile, the Lanter boys and Sid Ransom are going at it as well. Get back to business. Sid was hit in the head and the face with the butt end of a heavy pistol, and he was also shot. They took him over to Falmouth Street to his brother-in-law's, and Falmouth Street is 22, and he died 2 days later at the home of his brother-in-law. The boys went on home. The sheriff came and arrested them and took them to the county jail. Later on, though, they were beginning to fear mob violence, and so the sheriff transferred them to the Covington jail, where they remained until their trial. And again, if you look at newspaper accounts, all different tales were told. One says bail was denied. Another one said that they were allowed bail and were set free. In the end, they went on trial for the death of Ethelbert in June of 1909. But as of August 8th specifically, of 1909, they had not yet gone to trial for the death of Sidney Ransom. I know this because there's another newspaper article that says that tells this. It comes right out and says it. The reason for that article was that another brother, Walter, accidentally shot Grover. And the newspaper article said there was no way Grover would live. He had been shot in the lung. However, Grover did live. He died at the age of 88 in 1966. He and George both left the area. George never returned, dying in California. And Grover did return. He became a state highway patrolman and a game warden from Grant County. So within a year or two, Mary Alice's sons were on trial for murder, and another son accidentally shot them. So that those three events all happened in 1 year. She lost two sisters young, and then of course her husband 6 years later was, after her sons were on trial for murder, he was also on trial for murder. Can you just imagine what was going through her head and what she endured? Ben Franklin Lanter is a brother to Burt Lanter's father, Larkin, who is buried here as well. Across from the Lanters, we see this stone, and I put it in because it was just really a unique stone. It belongs to the Barnetts, Jesse and Amanda. And it looks like, you know, it's got the grid lines. You can see that. And it looks like somebody just took a pencil or a stick or something and engraved their names in the wet concrete. And across from that, we see a field stone. It's not the only field stone in the cemetery. There's at least one other, and there might be two. My jury's still out on one of them. Back to the fence, the chain link fence, we have the two house children here, Mabel Lee and her brother Raymond Luther. Mabel was 2.5 years old, and she died, keep this date in mind, she died on the 5th of July, 1907. Raymond was 4, and he died on the 12th of July, 1907. So they died within a week of each other. Their parents are buried next to them. They are Walter and his wife, Sally, or Sarah, is her proper name, Carr, House. And there we have a picture of Sally, as she was known. This isn't the end of their tragedy. I think, you know, to lose 2 children within a week is pretty bad, but the Houses raised their granddaughter, Dorothy Harris, after her mother died. Her mother's name was Oma, and Oma died from pneumonia following childbirth. Dorothy was born on the 15th of April, and Oma died on the 26th. So there's just 11 days difference between the birth of her baby and her death. Then Oma was not yet 30. She was close, but she had not yet had her 30th birthday. Then the Houses had another daughter, Georgia Dunn, who died when she was 33 from a cerebral thrombosis with an underlying cause of pellagra, and she left a 2-year-old child. So they lost 2 children as babies, and then they raised a grandchild because she lost her mother at a young age, and then they lose another daughter, and so they wound up with 2 granddaughters who really never knew their mothers, and that's kind of sad. Here is the first burial, and that is right across from the house plot that we just visited. This is Missouri Moore, and she was born and died on the 5th day of March in 1858. So that is the first burial in the cemetery here. Back to the fence is Joseph S. Jones. And this is one of those examples, it's facing the wrong way. I actually had to stand between the stone and the fence in order to photograph the writing on the stone. We have no idea what he died from, but he had just turned 21 the day before he died. His parents were George Washington Jones and Nancy Asbury Jones. They are buried in Gum Lick. And then we go back across from them to the Woods family. This is George and his wife, Mary Ellen Henry Woods. George is her second husband. Her first husband was Morris Orr, and like George, we don't know much about him. There's just you can't find out very much information at all. I do know that Morris joined Tom Moore's company of men during the Civil War. That would have been Company D, 4th Kentucky Cavalry, Confederate Army. He joined them in September of 1862, and he left Kentucky with them, never to come home. This regiment was comprised of mostly men from Cowansville. They were attached to Humphrey Marshall initially, and later to John Morgan, better known as John Hunt Morgan. They did detailed service with Jubal Early in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, and they were assigned the task of chasing bushwhackers in eastern Kentucky and western Virginia. Morris Orr had been detailed as a wagoner at several different times, and he was captured at Salyersville, Kentucky on the 1st of April, 1863, and was taken to Camp Chase, Ohio. He was then exchanged at City Point, Virginia in July. There was nothing else in his record until the 13th of February, 1864, when it mentions that he was killed on that date. No further records are given. He and Mary Ellen had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. They were very small children. So they would never probably have had very many memories, if any, of their father. And in that day and time, you know, a woman left with 3 children to raise was a hard thing. Across from them, back against the fence, is Willie Shipp. He died of tuberculosis at the age of 23. He's the son of George Washington Shipp, and his wife Delilah Jane Jones Shipp. Delilah was a sister to Joseph that we just met a few tombstones ago. And next to him is another sister, Annie. Annie lived, she was about 2.5 when she died. Or 12, I'm sorry, 12 when she died. Again, we don't know why, what was wrong. Here we have a picture of the Shipp family, George and Delilah. Little Willie is sitting in the chair between them. Standing next to his dad is John. And the girl in the center between her parents is, let me get the name right here, Mary. And then the little girl standing next to her mother is Clara, then Albert, and then Lula. Lula and her daddy are 2 of the 3 people in this cemetery that lived to be 90 years old. George Washington Shipp, of course, the Shipp family attended church at Roanoke, and he taught music to the congregation there and directed the music. Across from them, we have Archie Wells. There are quite a few Welleses buried in here. Again, this is before there were death certificates, but he was about 16 when he died, which is really young. We have the brother and sister buried here. They are the children of Clifton and Anna House. You can see the infant son died the day he was born, was not named. Pauline was really Aura Pauline. She was only 10 when she died. Her cause of death was pneumonia, and influenza was the contributory cause. And like I said, they are buried next to the fence. If you go across from them, you're going to see some of the house, more of the House family. These are 2 brothers who served in World War II. Frank served in the U.S. Navy Reserves, and William in the U.S. Infantry. Next to them, we see the Denny family. And I pointed this out because if you're familiar with the road named John Denny, this is the man that it's named after. If you turn onto John Denny Road off of Gum Lick, they would be the last house before you cross the creek. And at the time he was living, I don't think there was much of it. I don't think there were any houses across the creek. There might have been one. And then their daughter, Edith, is next to them. I put her in here because I think a lot of you will know her. She was a teacher for many, many years. So if you didn't have her in school at Morgan, You probably remember her coming to school and doing standardized testing with us at the end of the school year. Next to them, we have the Dance family plot. This is Cecil. He was a private in the Army during World War II. And then on down from him is his brother Frank and his wife Cora Bell. As you notice, they had a baby, Joanne, who died the same year she was born. Frank and Cora Bell both worked in the Pendleton County School District. It's one of the reasons I included them here. And the other one was they have, just look at that picture, isn't that great? Frank was in the custodial staff and Cora Bell worked in the cafeteria. Cora Bell is the third person in this cemetery that lived to be 90. Behind them is Grover Jones. It's against that back fence. He was a veteran of World War II, serving in the Army. And then if you come back up to Frank Dance and walk toward Gumlick Road, you will run into the Kells family. This is Thomas and Drusilla Pike Kells. They are seated there. They are both buried at Roanoke. Between them is their son Thomas, who's buried in Detroit, Michigan. Their daughter Esther on the far right is buried in California. And then the two sons standing in the back, left to right, James and Benny, they are both buried here in Roanoke. And you're going to see James first. He served in World War I. James, well, when the father, Thomas, died, many of the family members had already moved to Michigan. The rest of them eventually went, including their mother. She was brought back to Kentucky and buried. So James was living in Detroit, and he and his wife were getting a divorce. He did not want a divorce. He went to her workplace after hours to talk to her and try to convince her to come back home. He could not do that. So instead, he killed her and then turned the gun on himself and killed himself. They brought him back here to bury him. Next to him is his brother, Benny. The stone says, "Death is eternal life." It's kind of hard to read life there. Benny worked for the Packard Company in Detroit. He was engaged in what was termed a friendly scuffle on the sidewalk in Detroit somewhere. He was either pushed or he fell, and he hit his head on the concrete curb, and that's what killed him. Right behind them is one of the Porter plots here. We have Benjamin Garnett Porter, who served in the U.S. Marines in World War II, and William Kaysen in the U.S. Army Air Force in World War II. They are on the plot of John Breckenridge and Hallie Ravenscraft Porter. Fay was Garnett's uncle, and Fay was the father. Fay and Irene were the parents. Fay was the man's name, James Fay. They were the parents of Wanda, who married William Kaysen. Fay was Garnett's uncle, and he was also a son of John and Hattie Porter. John and Hattie are buried here. Here's a picture of them. I'm going to bring them up because Hattie was John's second wife. His first wife and first child died, and they are buried here as well. He also has two brothers who died sad and tragic deaths, I guess we could say, and they are also buried here. So John was not without some grief himself. Next to them, we have this unknown burial plot. You can see the border around that. The border is not uncommon in cemeteries, and it's not uncommon in this one. However, this one is a little larger than any of the others here in this cemetery. It also doesn't have a marker. The other one does. Other ones do, I should say. Zadok Newton Lowe. He has the most unique name in all of this cemetery. He was the son of Samuel and Sanford Lowe and his wife Mary, and Zadok's wife was Louisa Ravenscraft. There are a lot of Ravenscrafts in this cemetery. Behind them, we have Alexander and Area Ann Kenner. Alexander, they were from Pendleton County, or he was. He went to Missouri, and while he was out there, the Civil War broke out. He joined a Missouri regiment and fought for the Confederate Army. As you can see, the stone was, I would say it's probably the most unique stone in there, and it was probably the prettiest when it was in its prime. It's having a hard time. Someone has already replaced it with a stone that probably will weather better. I've got some close-up pictures for you here. You can really, the one on the left, you can really see the detail. I believe that up here, these are letters. I think that was their names. That looks like an A to me. And then on the right, you can see how the how it's cracked. You know, it's probably not going to be here after too many more winters. And then this is a close-up of the shells and the pretty little pebbles and the marbles that are on the back of it. As you walk from that and you walk the rest of the way down the hill, there's a single tree standing there, and this tombstone is next to it. It's Larkin and Margaret Lanter. Larkin's name was Robert Larkin. As I've already pointed out, he was they were the parents of Bert Lanter, whose wife Ida Bailey and 3 children are buried there. They also lost a daughter at the age of 24. She died, her name was Annabelle. She died from the flu and the whooping cough. That was, whooping cough was her secondary cause of death. That she does not have a stone, but she is buried here, according to her death certificate. Her brother James William, another son, died at 38 of pneumonia, and he is also buried here without a stone. He left 2 children under the age of 10. Margaret, as I said, was a Carr. So she was a sister to Sally House's father. Larkin was a brother to Sally House's mother. He was also a brother to Ben Lanter, who is also buried here. Margaret has siblings here as well. A brother Hiram is on down the hill from her, and next to her is her brother Henry and his wife Dee. Dee was a Lowe, and these are pictures of them. Dee died at the age of 38 and left 8 children behind, or well, 7 or 8 children. One son, Marion, died at the age of 7, but we don't really know when he was born or when he died, or if he was alive when his mother died. When she died, the youngest child was 2 and the oldest was 16. This family stayed intact. It was not very common in those days. Oftentimes, the family went to live, the children would go to live with other family members or neighbors in the area. But in this case, they did not. They stayed with their father. Henry Carr was blind. As a young man, he lost an eye to a briar. I have never found a military record for him. He was born at the right time to have fought in the Civil War. I think he was probably already blind. Neither side would take him then. Later on, he did lose the other eye to glaucoma. We just don't know how much later, if he had lost it before his wife died or if it came later. We don't know. This wasn't the only tragedy for this family. Being blind and losing a wife at a young age and leaving a lot of children, that was not their only tragedy. The oldest daughter, who was 16 when her mother died, was Delia, and she would marry at the age of 21, 5 years after her mother died, and by 25, she was a widow with 2 children. She kept her children, and she and another sister, who was also widowed young with a child, lived together. The other sister remarried, but Delia never did. She took her children and she went to Washington, D.C., where she worked for the federal government. Eventually, she either transferred or she got a different job with the federal government, and she went to Denver, Colorado, and took her children with her. And they all died in Colorado. And these are their stones. I've just got a picture of one of each. Each of them have a foot marker that says either mother or father, and that one says mother. And then their headstones look exactly like this, and they're very small, short tombstones. Next to them is Dee's sister, Evaline Lowe Porter. She was the first wife of John Breckinridge Porter. She was born in December of 1861 and died in February of 1882. So she was about 21. No, not quite. Yeah, about 20. Yeah, she was 21. No, she just turned 20. Okay, having trouble with math today. She was married. They had one son, William, and he was born in 1880 in February, and he died in July of 1882, about 4 months after his mother died. We don't know the cause of death for either of them, but John Porter, within 4 months, lost his wife and his child. So that had to be a really hard blow to take. Evaline and Dee Carr were sisters to Mary Alice Lowe. Next to them, we find the graves, and I don't have a picture of them, but of Joseph and Catherine Ravenscraft. And then next to Joseph and Catherine, we have 3 graves that just have a first name on the tombstone and then some term of endearment, like Baby Loretta, Our Boy Harry. Our Boy Harry and Baby Loretta, I believe, are probably the children of these Ravenscrafts, because they are. The next one will kind of tell you why I think that. This one says Darling Murdy. Someone on Find a Grave has identified her as Murdy Ravenscraft, the children of Joseph and Catherine. So Joseph and Catherine are on one end, and she's on the other, and then these 2 unnamed stones are in the middle. So I think that that's a possibility. I'm not sure if anybody knows it. She'd love to know that. If you walk up the hill from these graves, you will run into another Porter plot. And this is Joseph R. Porter's tombstone. He's just one of the Porters on here. He served along with his brother Ben and John Asbury, who was from this neighborhood. They served under Basil Duke in the 2nd Kentucky Cavalry of the Confederate Army. John was killed, and Ben and Joe were captured with John Morgan at Buffington Island, and they sat out the bulk of the war. Actually, you might as well say they did set out the war at Camp Douglas in Chicago, which was not a good experience, I am certain. Just Google Camp Douglas, and we'll leave it at that. Joe was killed at Dead Man's Corner in Williamstown in a bar fight. He was hit in the head with brass knuckles and died as a result. His wife was the former Martha Jane Shipp, and she is buried here as well. His brother Ben was an officer in the Roanoke Christian Church, and he clerked at the Morgan General Store, owned at that time by Roger Ewing. Ben had been institutionalized in an insane asylum as recently as 2 years prior to his death. How long he was there, I don't know, but at 2 years prior to his death, he had a stroke and was confined to his chair. So his wife brought him back home, because the article that I found that talked about this said he was no longer a threat and that she could handle him. He married his cousin, Sarah Jane Porter, and I've got a picture of Ben here. Pretty sure he is buried here as well. I may be able to come up with some information here pretty soon when things open back up a little bit to confirm that. If you go on up the hill a little bit more and go to the chain link fence that runs alongside Gum Lick, you find more Ravenscrafts. On this Ravenscraft plot, we see Roy Claypole, and as you can tell, he was almost 3 months old when he died. The cause of his death, according to his death certificate, is what we would call sudden infant death syndrome today. It was just a sudden death, cause unknown. His parents were Beely Claypole and Nanny Ravenscraft Claypole. That's not easy for me to say, is it? Beely served in World War I. That's his marker. If you walk back a row down toward the, stay on that plot, but walk down toward the hill, down the hill, you will find William Paul Wallace and Joseph Keaton Tye. Joseph Tye married William Wallace's daughter. William Wallace's wife was a Ravenscraft, and she is buried alongside him. You can see that William Paul Wallace served in World War II, and Joseph Tye was in the Navy during the Vietnam War. So on this plot, we have a World War I, a World War II, and a Vietnam veteran buried on the same plot. And then if you go down one more row, we have another, on the same plot, we have another Ravenscraft, William F. Ravenscraft, who served in World War II as well. Okay. So in summing up, if you look on Find a Grave, it shows 164 known burials in this cemetery. There are probably many more than that. The most frequently seen surnames on the tombstones would be Ravenscraft, House, Porter, Ship, Wells. There are a few others that you see quite a few of. At least 25 people in this cemetery lived to be 80 or older, which was pretty phenomenal given the time frame in which they were born. You have to think about if you were born even in the early 1900s, there was no measles vaccination, there was no polio cure, there wasn't any antibiotics. Those all came about more toward the middle of the 1900s. So you had to be pretty hardy people to live that old. And as I've already mentioned, 3 of those 25 were 90. At least 31 people buried here were 20 years old or younger. So that's about 19% versus about 15% 80 or above. There is one person buried here that was born in the 1700s. She was Elizabeth Shipp. She was born in 1784 and died in 1866. And she was one of those who lived to be in her 80s. She was 82. This concludes our tour today, and I hope you have enjoyed it. I will see you next month. Bye-bye for now.